It was supposed to be just another night shift. The roads were empty, and the only sounds were the hum of the truck's engine and the faint crackling of the radio. I didn't expect anything out of the ordinary that night. Just long stretches of highway and the dull, repetitive motion of steering through the dark. But then again, there's something about the night that makes even the most ordinary things feel off. I'm Jake, and I've been driving trucks for almost 7 years now. I've hauled everything from frozen goods to industrial machinery, but nothing ever really stood out. Until that night. I remember pulling into that truck stop around 2 a.m., just like I had countless times before. The neon lights flickered above, casting a sickly green glow over the lot. It was one of those places that wasn't quite a proper rest area, but it would do. A place to fuel up and get a quick bite or just take a break. As I parked the truck, I noticed something strange. There was a car parked a few spaces down, all alone. The kind of place you'd expect to see maybe 1 or 2 other trucks, not just one car. It wasn't a big deal, I thought. Maybe someone was just taking a nap. But as I walked past it, I caught a glimpse of something in the back seat. A shadow. I stopped dead in my tracks. My heart was pounding before I could even comprehend what I saw. It was almost like a silhouette, just wrong. The figure didn't move, but I could feel it staring at me, even though I couldn't see any details. For a second, I thought I was imagining things, but then the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was just a trick of the light or something. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. There was something off about that car, and I couldn't stop looking at it as I made my way into the convenience store. Inside, it was the same as always. The stale smell of coffee and the quiet murmur of the TV in the corner. The clerk, a kid who couldn't have been older than 20, looked up when I walked in. He seemed tired, like he'd been stuck in the same place for far too long. "Hey, Jake!" He greeted me like we were old friends. His name was Ryan, and I'd seen him a few times on my shifts. He was always there, always working. Never much to say, but always around. "Long night?" I asked, grabbing a coffee. "You could say that," he muttered, not looking up. "Weird stuff happening tonight, though." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Ryan hesitated, glancing nervously toward the door. He leaned in, speaking in a low voice. "There's been talk of someone watching the trucks. At night. I don't know, man. It sounds crazy, but people around here have been saying they've seen shadows moving through the parking lot after hours. Like, someone's here, but they don't belong." I laughed it off, trying to lighten the mood. "Yeah, man. Sounds like you've had too many cups of that coffee." But Ryan wasn't smiling. He was serious. "I'm not the only one who's noticed it. Just be careful, all right?" I was about to brush it off as one of those weird small-town rumors until I stepped back outside and saw the car again. The same one, parked just a little closer than before. And the figure in the back seat? Still there. But this time, it was moving. I froze, my stomach twisting. Something was wrong, I knew it. I couldn't explain it, but everything in me screamed to get out of there. As I stood there, staring at the car, I felt the sudden, overwhelming urge to run. But my legs wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, unable to tear my eyes away. That's when I heard it. A soft scraping noise behind me. It was too quiet to be anything normal, like the wind or a car starting up. It was deliberate, like someone was dragging something heavy across the asphalt. Slowly, purposefully, I turned around, and there, in the shadows near the edge of the lot, was a figure. A man, or something that looked like one. The shape didn't make any sense. He was tall, but his movements were jerky, unnatural. Like he wasn't quite human, or at least not in the way we think of people. His head turned sharply toward me, and even from a distance, I could feel the intensity of his stare. Without thinking, I bolted toward the truck, my heart hammering in my chest. Every step felt like a fight against some invisible force trying to hold me back. When I reached the truck, I didn't even bother with the door. I climbed into the cab through the window. My hands were shaking as I started the engine, my foot pressing harder than usual on the gas. I didn't care if the tires squealed. I just needed to get out of there. But as I pulled away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. something that wasn't supposed to be out there on that highway at all. And I wasn't sure if I was ever going to escape it. I drove through the night, my hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles were white. I tried to tell myself it was just the paranoia kicking in. Maybe I had imagined it all, the figure in the car, the scraping sound, the shadowy figure in the lot. But deep down, I knew I hadn't. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights behind me. Nothing. Just darkness stretching out behind me like a never-ending abyss. But it didn't make me feel any better. The silence was suffocating, and the tension in my body was building with every mile. The road felt endless, as if the highway had become some kind of winding, infinite loop that was closing in on me. At some point, I passed a few more truck stops, but none were lit up. Just dark, deserted places that I refused to pull into. I couldn't shake the feeling that if I stopped again, it might be the last time I ever did. The whole thing, it was just wrong. As I continued driving, I spotted a sign for a town up ahead. The name didn't ring a bell, but it was something to go for. Maybe I could find a place to lay low for a while, catch my breath. I wasn't sure how far I'd driven since that truck stop, but I needed to get off the highway for a bit. I pulled into the town, a place that seemed like it hadn't seen visitors in years. The streets were dark, the only light coming from flickering street lamps that cast long, eerie shadows. There was something off about the whole place. I stopped at the first gas station I saw. It was old, a little run down, but it had lights, and that was all that mattered. The pumps creaked when I stopped, and the thick smell of diesel filled the air. As I stepped out, I felt like the silence around me was swallowing everything whole. There was no sound, no movement, not a single car on the street. The door to the gas station opened with a creak as I stepped inside. Behind the counter stood an older man, his face shadowed by the dim light. He had a thick beard and a weathered look, like he'd been here forever. "You got anything hot?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but the words felt unnatural in the silence. He looked up slowly. His eyes were pale, almost too pale. There was something unsettling about his gaze. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he just stood there for a long moment, sizing me up. Then he muttered, "You shouldn't be out here at night." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean?" The man finally stepped forward, wiping his hands on his shirt. "This town, it's not what it seems. You're not the first trucker to stop by tonight." I tried to laugh it off, but the hair on the back of my neck stood up. "Look, I just need to rest a bit. I've been driving for hours." He leaned in, his voice dropping lower. "You don't understand. You might be thinking it's all safe out there, that the road's quiet. But you're not alone." My heart skipped a beat. "What the hell are you talking about?" He glanced toward the door, his eyes darting nervously. "You can't feel it? The eyes watching you? You can't hear it? The scraping, always out there. But they don't let you see them. Not at first." I was starting to feel like I had stepped into some kind of twisted nightmare. But it wasn't like I could just leave. The man had me on edge now, and I had to know more. "Who's watching?" I asked, though my voice didn't sound like my own. The man hesitated, his eyes flicking to the windows, like he was making sure no one could hear. Finally, he whispered, "There are things out there, things that follow the night shifts. They know when the truckers are alone. They've been coming around here for years, always when the lights go out." My stomach twisted. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to tell him it was just a bad story, but his voice was so steady, so certain. And when I looked outside, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A shadow. It wasn't moving like a normal person, it was jerking, shifting, a shape that didn't belong. It was there, just at the edge of the gas station parking lot. I stepped back, the fear rising inside me like a tidal wave. The man at the counter just watched, his gaze unblinking. "They're here," he muttered, almost to himself. Before I could react, I heard it. A soft scraping sound. Closer this time, like nails dragging across metal. It was so faint, I wasn't sure if I was imagining it. But then the scraping grew louder. I ran to the door, but as I opened it, I froze. There, standing at the edge of the parking lot, was the same figure I had seen back at that truck stop. But this time, it was no longer just a shadow. It had form, and it was moving closer. The cold air hit me like a slap as I stepped outside, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, my eyes locked on the figure creeping toward me from the shadows. Its form was unnatural, too tall, too thin, like a person stretched beyond human limits. The way it moved was jerky, as if it were struggling to maintain its shape. Each step seemed deliberate, but with a terrifying lack of rhythm. Couldn't breathe. The scraping sound had stopped, replaced by the quiet shuffle of its feet against the pavement. I should have run. I should have gotten back in the truck, slammed the door, and sped away without looking back. But I couldn't move. Felt like time had slowed down. Every heartbeat was louder than the last. Then, the man inside the gas station spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "Don't look away. If you do, it'll see you." I turned to him, my heart hammering in my chest. His face was pale, almost sickly, his eyes wide with fear. "What the hell is that thing?" I managed to rasp, my throat dry. The man didn't answer right away. He just stared at the creature, his mouth trembling. "You don't understand. It's not just one. There are more. They wait for the night shifts, for those of us who travel alone. They've been doing it for years." I tried to force my legs to move to get back into the truck, but I couldn't. It was like the creature had me in its grip, an invisible force pulling me toward it. My feet wouldn't obey. The figure was getting closer, its limbs snapping unnaturally, stretching as it moved. And then, just as it stepped into the dim light of the gas station, I saw its face. It wasn't a face at all, at least not in any human sense. It was a blur of features, a grotesque mash of eyes and mouths, all staring at me in different directions. There was no symmetry, no sense of order, just chaos. Its eyes seemed to burn with an unnatural glow, shifting like liquid, unblinking. The mouths? They were smiling, or maybe it was more of a grimace. I couldn't tell, but they were open, and I could see teeth. Not normal teeth, but jagged, broken things that didn't belong in any living creature. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. Felt like my throat had seized up. My legs were trembling now, every muscle in my body screaming at me to move, but my feet remained planted in the same spot. The man in the station had seen it, too. He was shaking now, his face drained of color. "It's here," he muttered, barely audible. "It's too late." Before I could react, the thing lurched forward with a terrifying speed. Its limbs bent at impossible angles as it closed the distance between us in a heartbeat. I tried to backpedal, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. The creature reached out with long, bony fingers, so thin they seemed to be made of paper, and brushed against my shoulder. I froze. There was no pain, no bite, nothing but cold, and then a sudden pressure. A voice, one that wasn't its own, spoke in my mind, soft but insistent. "You've been seen, Jake. You can't leave now." The words were not spoken aloud. They were in my head, wrapping around my thoughts, tightening like a noose. I gasped, trying to tear myself away from it, but the grip on my mind was too strong. The man in the station had started shouting, waving his arms frantically. "Get back inside. You can't fight it. Get inside." But it was too late. The thing's fingers dug into my skin, and the pressure became unbearable. The world around me began to blur, as if I were losing consciousness. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the creature's face, its twisted smile, and the feeling of being pulled away from the earth itself. When I woke up, I was no longer at the gas station. I was in the cab of my truck, the engine running, but the parking lot was gone. In its place was a vast, empty landscape, stretching endlessly in all directions. It was like nothing I had ever seen before. The sky was dark, but not quite night. The air was thick, heavy, as if I was underwater. The truck, it was still mine, but something was wrong. I could feel it. The radio crackled, the sound distorted, and then I heard a voice. "Jake, you're still here. You haven't left. They're waiting for you." I whipped my head around, but there was no one in the cab with me. The voice was coming from the radio. My heart skipped a beat. The voice, it was the man from the gas station. But how? Don't trust the road. Don't trust the signs. Don't stop. I slammed my hand down on the radio, desperate to turn it off, but it didn't stop. The voice kept repeating, the static growing louder with every word. The cold feeling crept back into my chest. Suddenly, the lights of the truck blinked out. The headlights went dark, leaving me in total blackness. And then, from the distance, I saw it again. A shadow. No, more than one. They were all around me now. I slammed my hands on the wheel, my heart hammering in my chest. The shadows, they were closing in. I could feel them, moving in from every direction, watching me, their presence suffocating. The truck's headlights flickered, but they weren't enough to push back the darkness that surrounded me. I couldn't see where the road ended or where it began. All I could see were the shapes in the distance, growing larger, closer with each passing second. I had to drive. I had no choice. My instincts screamed at me to move, to get out of whatever nightmare I had stumbled into. The engine roared to life as I slammed the accelerator down, but the truck didn't respond the way it should have. It lurched forward, almost as if the engine itself was struggling, fighting against me. Then came the voice again. Jake, don't look behind you. I froze, the words sinking into my skin like ice. I hadn't even realized I was glancing in the rearview mirror, but now my eyes snapped back to the road. The urge to look behind me was unbearable, like an invisible force pulling my head back toward the darkness I knew was there. I tried to focus, to ignore the weight pressing down on my chest, but the pull was too strong. And then, in the reflection of the mirror, there they were, the figures, at least a dozen of them, walking alongside the truck, their forms barely visible in the dim light, but unmistakable. They were tall and gaunt, their limbs too long, their faces too twisted. Some were dragging themselves along the ground, crawling at an impossible pace. Others moved in jerky, disjointed steps, their heads cocked at strange angles, their eyes glowing faintly, like pale, hungry moons. I felt the fear start to rise in my throat, choking me. I forced myself to look away from the mirror, but I could still feel them. Feel their presence closing in, inching closer with every second. They weren't just walking anymore. They were running. I hit the gas harder, pushing the truck to its limits, but it wasn't enough. No matter how fast I went, they kept pace with me, matching my every move. The road, the landscape, everything seemed to stretch on endlessly, looping back on itself, as though I were trapped in some kind of endless void. I had to get off the road. I swerved the truck sharply, hoping to find a way out, but the world around me shifted. The road became something else, darker, narrower. There were no longer any signs, no familiar landmarks, just a vast, empty stretch of highway that seemed to have no end. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I saw something in the distance. A light, a faint glow, cutting through the darkness. I didn't think. I just went for it. I pushed the truck toward the light, my hands white-knuckled on the wheel, my mind a blur of terror and confusion. The light grew brighter as I sped toward it. I could see now, through the blur of panic, that it wasn't a street lamp or some distant beacon. It was a building, an old structure in the distance, a gas station. I didn't care. I just needed to stop. I needed to escape. The shadows were closer now, right on my tail, and I could hear them, feel them behind me, scraping, shuffling, drawing nearer. The sound of their movements was almost deafening, like a swarm of insects closing in on their prey. I slammed the brakes as I reached the gas station, the tires screeching against the pavement. I didn't even bother to turn off the engine. I grabbed the door handle and flung it open, stumbling out of the truck and into the gas station parking lot. The building was old, the lights flickering in a sickly, fluorescent glow. But there was something strange about it. It was deserted. Not a soul in sight. No one behind the counter, no customers. Just an eerie, unsettling silence. I didn't care. I didn't want to be out there, exposed, with the things that were chasing me. I ran to the door of the gas station, but it wouldn't open. It was locked. Panic surged through me. My breath came in ragged gasps, my chest tight. I pounded on the door, but there was no answer. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw them. The figures. They were here, standing at the edge of the parking lot, just beyond the light. Watching. Waiting. I turned back to the door and tried again. It wouldn't budge. And then I heard it. A low growl. It wasn't like any animal I had ever heard before. It was guttural, deep, vibrating through my chest. The sound came from behind me, from the darkness just outside the light. Couldn't breathe. I spun around, my eyes wide, desperate to find a way out. The figures were closing in, their movements faster now, more purposeful. They weren't shuffling anymore. They were running. One of them reached the light, stepping into the pool of brightness in front of the door. Its face was clearer now, and the terror in my chest threatened to swallow me whole. Its mouth was open, its teeth bared, sharp and jagged. But its eyes, those eyes, they were the worst part. They were empty, hollow, like something that had once been human, but had long since given up any pretense of being alive. I stumbled back, my mind reeling, trying to find something, anything, that could save me. I had to get away. I had to survive. And then, I heard it again, clearer this time. The voice from the radio. "Jake, there's no escape. They will never stop. You've been seen. You can't run from them." And I realized, with horrifying clarity, that the creature, whatever it was, had already won. The cold sweat on my skin was suffocating. My hands were trembling, my legs barely holding me up as I backed away from the door. The gas station had become a tomb. It felt like the air had thickened, suffused with a dread that I couldn't escape. I was trapped, but I had no idea where the exit was. Where could I run? The night was closing in like a vice, and the things in the shadows, they were getting closer. That growl I'd heard earlier, it wasn't just one creature. No, they were all around me now. The figures, the things. They were coming from every direction, emerging from the darkness at the edge of the gas station parking lot. I could feel their eyes on me, their presence weighing me down, filling the air with a sense of impending doom. I knew there was no safe place, no escape. The world had shifted. The road was no longer a place to run, but a trap, a cage I couldn't break free from. I turned to the back of the gas station, desperate. Maybe I could find a door, a window, anything to get inside. The ground beneath me felt uneven, like the earth itself was shifting, as if the whole place wasn't real anymore. But I couldn't stay outside, not with them closing in. I ran, stumbling toward the rear of the station, where I thought I saw a flicker of light. I didn't care where it was coming from. I had to get inside. I reached for the door handle, locked. Of course, it was locked just like everything else. Then I heard it. A voice, soft but unmistakable, from behind me. "They always get in." I froze. The voice was low, almost a whisper, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. It wasn't the radio this time. It wasn't the man from the gas station either. It was a voice I hadn't heard before. A voice full of malice and sadness, like it had been waiting for me. I spun around, eyes wide, my breath coming out in short, panicked bursts. There was no one there, but that didn't stop the dread that surged through me. I knew, somewhere deep down, that I wasn't alone. Not truly. The things that had been following me weren't just creatures of flesh and bone. They were something older, something more sinister, something that had been waiting for me, for all of us. I looked back toward the front of the gas station, my heart sinking into my stomach. The figures had moved closer. There were at least 6 of them now, their grotesque forms silhouetted against the pale light. They weren't walking anymore. They were running. The ground shook with their steps, the sound like thunder reverberating through the air. I was out of time. I turned and ran around the side of the building, desperately searching for any opening, any escape route. I was getting dizzy now. The night was closing in. Everything was spinning. The shadows were everywhere, consuming the space around me. There was no place to hide, no way out. And then I heard it again, that scraping sound. But this time it wasn't in the distance. It was right beside me, I turned to find one of the figures standing just feet away, its face twisted in a grotesque grin. Its eyes burned with a faint, unnatural light, and the air around it seemed to pulse with an unholy energy. It reached out toward me, its long, spindly fingers brushing against my arm, sending a wave of ice-cold dread through my body. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. All I could do was watch as its mouth stretched open impossibly wide, revealing row upon row of jagged, broken teeth. It was close enough now that I could hear it breathing, a low, raspy sound, like the air was being sucked out of the world itself. And then, just as it was about to reach for me, the voice from the radio spoke again. "You can't run. You can't hide. It's already too late. They have you now." I tried to scream, but the sound was caught in my throat. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. My vision was starting to blur, the world growing darker and darker, like I was falling into some abyss. But before I could even process what was happening, the creature yanked me forward, dragging me toward it with inhuman strength. I fought back, clawing at its cold, twisted fingers, but it was no use. My body felt like it was made of lead, as though my very essence was being drained away with each passing second. I had no choice but to watch as the creature pulled me into the darkness, the light from the gas station fading behind me. And then, everything went black. When I woke up again, I wasn't in the gas station anymore. I was back in my truck, still on the road, the headlights cutting through the night. I didn't know how much time had passed. Hours, days, or maybe just moments. The world outside the truck seemed different. The road was empty, just as it had been before. No sign of the figures. No sign of the gas station. No sign of anything familiar. But I knew. I wasn't free. The world had shifted once again. I wasn't driving down the highway anymore. I was trapped in a never-ending loop. The road, the figures, they were all around me, always waiting. And I realized, with a sickening clarity, that I would never escape. Not alive. And I would never be alone. I wish I could tell you that the next few hours were a blur, that I somehow managed to drive away from it all, but that would be a lie. The truth is, nothing made sense anymore. I wasn't even sure if I was still on the road. The truck had become just another vessel, a cage I couldn't escape from. I had no idea where I was anymore, or how long I had been driving. All I knew was that the figures were still out there, somewhere, just beyond the edge of my headlights, watching, waiting. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw them, shadows moving along the edge of the road, skirting the distance just outside the light, as if they were part of the landscape itself. I couldn't hear them anymore. No scraping, no shuffling, but I knew they were there, waiting for me to let my guard down. And I knew I wouldn't make it much longer if I stayed on this road. But where could I go? Every turn I took led me further into the darkness. The road seemed to stretch out in all directions, an endless loop. I couldn't find a way off, no matter how hard I tried. The signs had disappeared, the familiar markings of the highway replaced with something unfamiliar, something wrong. And then, as I drove, something else started to happen. The truck began to slow down. It wasn't the engine that was giving out, it wasn't anything mechanical at all. It was like the road itself was pulling me back, dragging me toward something. It was as if the ground beneath me had become a part of the nightmare. Something that wasn't quite real, but something that I couldn't escape. I tried to press the gas, but it was useless. The truck was no longer responding, like I was driving through thick mud. The harder I pushed, the slower I went. My panic grew, and soon I was desperately pulling at the wheel, trying to force the truck forward. But it was like I was stuck in some sickening trance. That's when I saw it. In the distance, a flicker of light. I didn't care what it was anymore. It was a sign of life, and I was desperate for any kind of escape. I turned the wheel sharply, heading toward it, not caring if I was veering off the road. The truck screeched as I tried to correct my path, but I kept moving toward that light. The closer I got, the clearer it became. It was another gas station, just like the one I had visited before. The familiar neon lights blinked in the distance, but something felt off. It wasn't a relief this time. It wasn't the safety I had once sought. It was another trap. I stopped the truck in front of the station, the engine sputtering out, and for a moment, everything went silent. No more scraping, no more shuffling, just a heavy, oppressive stillness that pressed in from all sides. I glanced at the door, wondering if I was still trapped in some twisted loop. It was locked just like the others. There was no one inside. The station was abandoned. I felt the weight of their eyes on me, the weight of everything that had been chasing me. It was like the darkness itself had grown thicker, and now I was surrounded by it. And that's when I saw him, the man, the one who had been behind the counter at the first gas station. He was standing in front of me now, staring at me with those pale eyes. His face was blank, emotionless, like he wasn't even human anymore, just a hollow shell. "You should have stayed on the road, Jake," he said softly, his voice empty. "You can't run from what's already found you." I tried to back away, but my feet wouldn't move. I was paralyzed again, caught in the same trap, the same nightmare. The figures were close now. I could feel them closing in, their presence growing stronger with each breath. The man stepped closer, and with every step he took, the air grew colder. "They've been waiting for you," he continued. "You're not the first. You won't be the last. And you'll never leave. Not unless you accept it." I felt a chill run through me, colder than anything I had ever felt before. My skin prickled, and I could see my breath fogging in front of me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. It was like the very essence of fear had frozen my voice, leaving me trapped in this waking nightmare. The man reached out, his hand brushing against my arm. The touch was ice cold, sending a jolt of terror through my body. "You can't escape," he whispered. "You're already theirs." And then, just as I thought I might break, the world around me shifted again. The truck, the gas station, the man, all of it began to distort. I could feel the ground beneath me shaking, the world falling apart. The darkness was closing in, swallowing everything whole. And in that moment, I realized it wasn't the figures I should have been afraid of. It was the road itself. This nightmare, this endless, looping nightmare. It was all part of something bigger. Something that had been waiting for me from the very beginning. There was no escape. I was already lost. The world around me shattered. Not like glass, no, it was far worse. It was like the very fabric of reality had been torn open, unraveling before my eyes. The gas station vanished. The truck was no longer mine, and the road that stretched out endlessly before me twisted into something unrecognizable. I stood there, frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. The shadows, the figures, they were no longer just distant presences. They had engulfed me. They were all around, their cold, terrible eyes staring into me from every direction. There were no longer any distinguishing features, no boundaries. They weren't shapes. They were thoughts, pressing in on my mind, suffocating me. The man, the one I had seen at the gas station, was gone. The place that had once felt like some kind of refuge was now an empty void. I was standing in the heart of it now. There was nothing, except for them. Their presence filled the space like a disease, infecting the air I breathed. It felt like they were slowly tearing me apart from the inside, piece by piece, like they were rewriting my very being. I could feel their hunger, their need for me, their desire to consume everything that I was. I finally found my voice, though it was weak, trembling. "Why me?" I whispered into the void. "What do you want from me?" A voice, soft as a breeze, answered. "You were chosen." My knees buckled, and I collapsed to the ground. Chosen? Chosen for what? What did that even mean? The shadows crept closer, their forms swirling in the darkness. They circled me inch by inch as if savoring my fear. I could hear the scrape of their limbs against the ground, slow, deliberate. It was the sound of something ancient, something hungry. I tried to scream, but no sound came. My mind was beginning to break, to splinter under the weight of their gaze. My thoughts were fragmented, pieces of memories, voices, images, all twisted into a single thread of terror that I couldn't escape. I couldn't understand what was happening. It was like I had been pulled into some alternate reality, some otherworldly trap, and now I was stuck. There was no way back. Then, through the fog of panic and confusion, I saw it. A light, a flicker in the distance. A door. I wasn't sure if it was real. I wasn't sure if anything here was real. But the light was drawing me in, like a beacon in the darkness. Without thinking, I scrambled to my feet. I had no choice. I had to reach it. It was my only chance to escape. I ran. No, I stumbled through the thick, suffocating darkness, every step feeling like I was dragging myself through a nightmare. The figures were all around me now, their twisted forms closing in, but I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. I reached the light, and as I touched it, everything went silent. The world stopped. I opened my eyes. I was back in my truck. The road was still beneath me. The hum of the engine, a comfort I hadn't realized I needed. The night was calm, the sky dark and empty, just as it should have been. The truck had returned to its normal, familiar state. The headlights were shining, the engine running smoothly. But there was something wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling. The silence was too deep, too heavy. I turned the corner, glancing in the rearview mirror. For a split second, I thought I saw them, those shadows, and I heard it again. The scraping sound, faint but unmistakable. It was them. They were still following me. No, not following. They were still here. And I realized with a sickening certainty that I had never left. The nightmare hadn't ended. It had only just begun. Did you like these stories? Write in the comments. And please write what you didn't like. It will be useful for me to know your opinion. And I will improve my work. Thank you. Subscribe to my channel and click the bell so as not to miss new stories. I try for you.